everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Trump has, of course, come out of the gate with a absolute blitz of executive orders. We're seeing planes full of illegal immigrants going back. Birthright citizenship is being challenged. Affirmative action has been struck down. DEI, so many of these things that are just have made American life unfair for many people, but very specifically have often targeted white Americans. And so I wanted to talk to the guy who wrote the book on anti-white discrimination and say, what do these executive orders look like? Do they look promising? Is the battle won? Is there more to do? What is the sustainability of this? And what does the future look like? So joining me today is Jeremy Carl. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Auron. It's been a really great last few days.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful time to win, and that's the other thing that I think we'll get into today. Some of the people who are blackpilling, naysaying, oh, the executive is out of control, this isn't conservatism, we're going to bore down into all of that, because I think we're both more than fed up with hearing all that garbage.
About a day and a half in, I actually did get tired of winning for a little bit. I mean, I took a little rest. And now I'm ready to win again, but like it was really too much. It was too good.
Yeah, had to sit down, have a glass of tea, take a second, before we got back into it. You don't want to throw your back out, whole week of winning can, after conservatives not being able to win for, most of my lifetime, this is a lot, We
haven't exercised these muscles,
Exactly.
Middle-aged guys. So, yeah.
Atrophied, but now prepared to win. All right, well, we're going to jump into all that, guys. But before we do, let me tell you about today's sponsor. How far will a teacher go to save a kid on the brink of losing everything? From Angel Studios, the studio behind Sound of Freedom, comes Brave the Darkness, an inspiring true story about a troubled teen struggling to survive in a world that lets him down. Haunted by torturous childhood memories, Nate Williams finds himself engulfed in darkness. When his drama teacher, Mr. Dean, bails him out of jail and takes him in, Nate must confront his past before it leads him to his own destruction. Brave the Darkness reminds us that one meaningful connection can change everything. This powerful film will leave you uplifted and inspires as it shows the strength of compassion and the impact of never giving up on someone. I encourage you to see Brave the Dark in theaters now. Get your tickets today at angel.com/Auron. That's angel.com/Auron. All right, so Jeremy, let's start out with kind of an overview, because you are somebody who was in the first Trump administration. You've got a long history in the conservative movement, working over at the Claremont Institute. You're a guy who's plugged in a lot of ways. Many people thought that Trump's rhetoric would be good. They expected good rhetoric from Trump. Big promises, bombastic, setting that anchor, the big ask. He knows what he's doing there. No one, I think, would expect anything less from Donald Trump. But it was the execution that everybody was worried about. Had he learned his lesson? Did he recognize the challenges he was facing? Could he select the kind of personnel that could make this happen? Again, I know that you were more familiar with what was going on inside baseball, what a new Trump administration would look like. But is this what you expected? Is it beyond your expectations? What do you think?
No, it definitely exceeded my expectations. And I thought things would be better. I mean, I think the appointment of Stephen Miller in the really key role that he is playing as essentially deputy chief of staff. And again, he had a significant role in the first Trump administration, but a much bigger one this time. I think it was clear that people had learned from 2016, and this is just sort of for those of us who are Christians. I think this is kind of a great example of God's providence in some small way, and that I think had we just rolled in and won the last election, which in my view it was we did legitimately win it, but it was sort of stolen from us. We would have been in a much worse situation. We were it would have helped, but we needed like 4 years to really just marinate, to see how ridiculous the left would be, and to essentially plot. I mean, to be ready so that we were really ready to execute. And I think what is really interesting also about these executive orders is that they really didn't leak, right? I mean, not even in the conservative movement. I wasn't having my friends sort of whisper to me, oh, it's coming. I mean, I did talk to some folks who were involved in it who I knew had read the Unprotected Class, and that's great. But there are a lot of folks who I'm sure had a lot of influence, including many I'm sure greater than me. But I think it's just sort of something was in the air, and they really they moved aggressively and they were ready. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to speculate on kind of how many I's and were dotted and T's were crossed. But the fact that the Democrats aren't immediately crowing about, oh, you made 15 errors that we're just going to exploit to get those thrown out, indicates to me that these were much more carefully constructed than they were for the 2017 executive orders we saw.
Yeah, I gotta say, as someone who really expected violence after the second victory of Donald Trump, watching the left just completely melt, like just completely fold in this scenario, it feels like they have no momentum, no passion. All of their, they threw out, the Roman gate with Elon Musk, and even the ADL said, "Oh, calm down, guys. He's obviously just a spurg," right? Like,
right.
That's amazing that you had that kind of pivot in this moment. You can kind of tell they're just lifeless and limp. Their best thing is to call the guy they've called a Christian nationalist for years is like, well, he's not Christian enough. He sat down with the bishop who talked about the importance of trans kids, and he had made a funny face. Right. Like that's really what they're going with at this point.
Right. So-called bishop, I have to put that in there.
Yeah, fair enough. But I'm not Episcopalian, so I don't have to pretend either way.
Anyway, yes, I think it is interesting, and I think I wasn't sure which way it would go after the election, right? Whether they would just turn the resistance up to 11, or whether I did actually sort of think that this was in the possibility set, that frankly, having thrown every single ridiculous thing they could at Trump, having tried every illegal maneuver, having harassed, debanked, imprisoned, you name it, the full court press from the media, seeing all that and the fact that at the end of the day it didn't work, and frankly it didn't work pretty dramatically. I mean, this was a fairly decisive win for President Trump, that they just in their heart of hearts, they kind of know that there's a deeper loss that they suffered here. And I think they're still sort of internalizing exactly what that means for them. I'm not seeing a lot of signs that they've really learned anything deep, but I think they've recognized at least that the playbook that they were trying was not sufficient.
Yeah, it's important that you just pointed out that, Trump didn't just limp across the finish line wounded after all of their attempts. He blew them out the back of the speakers, right? This was a huge win across the board, and you can see the coalition just turning in on itself and just, when whatever energy they have, they're just kind of tried to point fingers afterwards and say, oh, well, you need to figure out how to talk to men more. Well, maybe we should try putting the woke away, as my friend Nima Parvini puts it, and others saying, no, we can't, that's a betrayal, and we need to dial it up to 12, and we can't talk to men, they're the root of all like, they're just sniping at each other, and when they turn around and try to do anything to Trump, it was funny. One of my favorite things is to watch liberal media when they're losing, and you could hear during the inauguration, just all the commentators, their response was basically, well, Trump just did that. Well, look at that there. Like, that's all they had was they couldn't even do their normal pearl clutching with any real vigor. Yeah. So it was really amazing to just watch that all get sapped out of the room. I gotta ask, I know, again, the administration knew going in that things needed to change, that they had to adjust their approach. They had to take things more seriously. They had to be more disciplined. But what do you think the role of the assassination attempt played on this? It really feels like that was a moment, not just spiritually, but also, mentally and professionally, it just focused, everyone locked in and said, this cannot happen. We have to be real about this.
Well, I think it had a clear effect on Trump, as I think it would for anybody. I mean, even Trump, with all of his almost supernatural energy, is a human, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you come that close to death, it's going to affect you. So I think it had an effect on Trump, but it also, as I think you were just alluding to, it really supercharged a lot of the followers to realize, hey, we got to win this thing. We're playing for keeps. Every card is on the table, and we really just ran through the tape. And I do think that the left is, they're sort of on the back foot, as the British like to say. But, I think at the same time, I've got to be honest, I would love to keep winning at this level for the next 4 years. I think we do have to be realistic that right now we are probably at a high point. The left has been hit with so many things. They haven't had time to organize their resistance. They will. I think there are going to be two really key moments that are kind of going to truly determine whether we're just getting some very nice wins, but we go back to something that is a little more resembling business as usual, or whether we have a truly revolutionary paradigm shift. And the first of those is going to be when we start seeing liberal activist judges trying to overturn some of these rules. What is the response of the Trump administration going to be? What is the response of legal counsel going to be? Are we just going to roll over and say, a district judge in Seattle said no, so we have to throw out everything nationwide? Or are we going to take a more aggressive legal strategy, as I hope we do? And then I think the second thing that's almost even more important than that is just the creation of facts on the ground and making sure that we really have that full follow through. So, for example, in theory, we fired all these DEI people, or at least we're in the process of doing that. They're all officially on leave, and I think they're about to be fired. Are the security clearances going to be gone? Are the door codes going to be gone? Are their desks going to be cleaned out? I mean, does that really, really happen so that we haven't just said the order, but those folks are really out of the government and anything they do is trying to get back in, as opposed to, we're sort of fighting them, but they're still in place. So I think let's watch what happens in the next few weeks. And we really need to make sure we've executed on the orders. Now we've got to make sure that we execute on the consequences of those orders.
Yeah, it really is a question of, did we just, put a new coat of paint on the lawn furniture, or are we really rearranging things? And
Right.
that was a lot of what I wanted to talk to you about. But let's, I guess, get into a few of the orders first before we analyze whether we think they're going to hold up or be executed on. I think, obviously Trump made promises about militarizing the border and these kind of things early on, right? And amazing to see him do those things, but we at least got the promise, so there was some expectation. The DEI one also, I very much would have expected that to come. I gotta say, birthright citizenship and affirmative action.
Yeah,
I didn't even see those coming. Like they were on my radar, a wish list. Hey, Auron,
sure.
if you were 15 slots down, what would you love to see Trump get to? But to see them dropped so early is really impressive. Maybe we could start with the affirmative action one, as this is something you've written on in quite a bit of detail. We already got a court ruling saying affirmative action shouldn't be a part of college entrance. So what does this affirmative action executive order do? What role does that play?
Well, it essentially gets the government out of the affirmative action business, period. And this was interesting because it was something, and this sort of points to the sort of structural fakeness that we've had in the party. Reagan wanted just 15 years after it had been implemented to kind of eliminate this affirmative action order, and he was sort of talked out of it by big business, who said they kind of put it in place at that point. They didn't want to revisit it. So Trump has been much more aggressive. It suggests that basically anybody who's doing business with the government, and nobody shoot me here if I get all the legal details wrong, because again, I'm not a lawyer, but basically, if you're doing business with the government now and you're engaging in these types of practices, you're potentially at risk. And certainly, at the very least, what it does is it just takes it off the table from anything the federal government is doing. And so in that sense, it's really huge. And I think there's no reason why it shouldn't. Liberal judges can be so ridiculous that, we saw with DACA where Obama put it in illegally and then we withdrew it. And the judge said, you can't withdraw this order, even though, of course, it was an illegal order in the first place. So I'm not sure what a legal judge, on the left might do, but to me, there's no question the president does have the authority to withdraw this, the Johnson administration's executive order on affirmative action. And it's huge that he's done so.
So the other big one that again was shocking to me was birthright citizenship, and this one is amazing on several levels because not only does it obviously address a problem that we're facing right now, something that was always a perversion of the 14th Amendment, which is itself a mess, but I've got an episode of that coming up. But it was always a intentional perversion of the intention of the 14th Amendment, which was obviously to clarify that freed black slaves were indeed Americans. And going out of your way to warp that into the idea that anyone who happens to be here illegally, who has a baby, for 5 minutes while they're here, immediately grant citizenship to them, that was always an insane thing. But not only do you solve this problem, it also throws a serious wrench into the left's larger plan of basically using demographic change to shift permanently the American democratic process. It was always the intention to basically leave the border open or allow a large amount of fraudulent visa immigration so that these people would come in. They're much more likely to vote Democrat once their children have become citizens and come of age of voting. That was always very clearly a big part of the Democrats' long-term generational strategy for victory in the United States. So not only are you improving the lives of Americans and everything else, but this is what Curtis Yarvin would call the real political win, because it makes the next victory easier, right? You are ensuring future victories by getting this victory. What do you think about that order, and what do you think about its ability to stand up in court?
Well, it's huge. And I think as far as whether it's going to stand up, it's very interesting to see whether the Supreme Court will have the backbone to do the right thing. And of course, I entirely agree with your interpretation here of the 14th Amendment and what it did and the perversion of it in Wong Kim Ark case of, I believe it was 1904, that the great Justice Harlan actually dissented from, that kind of got us into the sort of more dubious interpretations that we've had ever since. But I'll tell you, I mean, I think just as a note of caution, I think what we're up against to a degree, we've already seen this enjoined by a single district judge in Seattle, a Reagan appointee and sort of an emeritus judge. But I assume, actually, I mean, I haven't looked in detail, but I assume not a guy who was just put in there for a deal, but an actual guy who somebody thought was a conservative at some point. And not only did he kind of throw this out, but he said, this is ridiculous. It's like the most ridiculous thing I've seen in 40 years of judging. And I can't believe that where are the White House lawyers who even looked at this? So he was very dismissive. And of course, I mean, this is just empirically wrong, right? Like, even if you take the other side of this question, there's been a very rich legal debate in the conservative legal community over the last couple decades on this very question. People have written, papers on either side of it. But the fact that even a nominally conservative judge, or at least a Reagan appointed judge, would react to this with shock and horror indicates that nothing is going to be fully secure until it's ruled upon. It's really important. I hope we do get the right ruling. But I think it's going to be, it'll be interesting to see ultimately which way it goes. But I will sort of parenthetically point out a kind of a thing that I'd said about these orders in general, which I think is really important, which is no matter what we do, we move this all into contested space. And that's really important. There's a lot of black pillars out there being like, Biden can just, or not Biden, but whoever the next Democrat, they can just rescind them. But no, with something like affirmative action or even this, all of a sudden it's a contested point where before it was sort of settled law, right? And now every conservative congressman sort of needs to take a view on this, right? And I think the vast majority of them are going to be on our side. And so the left can't sleep as easy as they did before. And for example, if you're looking to go into a DEI as a profession, are you going to feel confident doing that now, knowing that the next time a Republican president comes in, they may just yank that out from under you? And so I think that even though these orders are subject to being overturned, the wins are actually going to be quite durable.
Yeah, the the idea that all of this has moved into contested territory again is very important. You know, a lot of people have made the point. I've made the point. Anything that is done with an executive order can be undone with an executive order. In fact, that's the very basis of Trump's moves here. And so you do need to find legislative avenues or more permanent ways to kind of put this in place. But again, the fact that none of this was on the table with Republicans, and that's a big shift just in and of itself. Most Republicans would not have even stated these positions. Like,
Right.
I know Marco Rubio is getting better, but imagine Marco Rubio like saying this, 5 years ago, any of it, right?
Right.
Or Mitt Romney or any of these guys, right? Like this would just had never been stated by a Republican politician, much less have taken any action on it. And as you say, now the question is, why aren't you with Donald Trump on this? Give me the specific reason that you are not behind the guy who just had this miraculous victory and has the massive wave of support. Like, explain to me in detail why your position is the same as the left's position on this issue. And now is a great time, everybody, to politely but firmly bully all of your Republican commentators and politicians into these positions. Now is not the time. I want to be really clear here because a lot of people, you need don't blow up this chance. You got to be careful. You got to tread lightly. You don't want to say anything ridiculous. No, that is the worst way to understand rhetoric and explain how these dynamics work. Now is the time to push as far as possible. You will never, ever see the window swing like this again. Do not back off. These are the correct positions. They are what's good for the United States. They are what's good for the conservative movement. And there is absolutely zero ground to stand on saying, oh, well, I got to hold back and I'm principled. I can't do it. No. The principle is we are securing the border of the United States and the legal function of the United States for its people. We are rescuing them from the left. That is what we are doing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think one encouraging thing, and again, something that we can certainly use against sort of some of the weak sisters in the party, is we are beginning to see some of the first polling results from how people have thought about these initial executive orders. And it's positive, right? Like, it's not now, of course, again, I want to be fair. We're at a high water mark. Trump is in a little bit of a honeymoon, et cetera, et cetera. But if people really hated this stuff, you would still see it in the polling. But in fact, what you're seeing is, I just saw a recent, polling that was like 52-42 for people, like what they thought about the executive orders. Now, the Democrats certainly never waited till they had majority support for any of the outrageous stuff we've done. They did. So I'm not suggesting that we somehow, need to, put our finger up in the wind and make sure that we're at 50.1% before we do anything. But I think the bottom line is the things that you just articulated are in fact popular things. And that's just one more reason that we don't need to back off doing them.
Yeah, people want to see the strong horse. They want to follow the strong horse. There is no reason after having won this victory that you should back away. And that takes me to our next topic that we were going to discuss, kind of the weak need that we're seeing a little bit here. It's not much. I got to be honest. It's less than I thought. Encouraging to see how many people actually are moving this direction and taking the position you're talking about. But in everything I post, in every video I make, and every article, I'm still getting a few guys being like, well, this isn't conservative. He's not being conservative. Oh, executive overreach. We can't do this. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like at some point you just have to kind of excise these folks. It's painful. I mean, a little bit. I keep praying for the regeneration of National Review, and maybe that's just I'm too soft-hearted of a guy. I mean, I wrote for them for years, right? But like, it's just they're like constitutionally addicted to losing or something. And we're seeing this also with the executive order on the January 6th stuff, which is, I mean, there's lots of reasons that you can give for why that blanket pardon was appropriate, but the simple one is that you had blatant prosecutorial misconduct and judicial misconduct. And so focusing on, well, this guy did something bad. Yeah. You know what? Some of those guys did do some bad things. And by the way, the vast majority of those guys they did do some prison time for it, like
Right.
it wasn't like they didn't get punished. We're not just saying, like it's a mulligan if you hit a police officer. No, I mean, that is behavior that should be punished. But at a certain point, I mean, this is kind of a standard principle of American law. They throw out cases all the time, and the left, of course, cheers this, where the guy was guilty, but the prosecutors were guilty of misconduct, so you can't try the case. Well, you had that en masse there. And these are people who supported us. So, of course, you're going to do it. But just some people don't get it. And then, of course, you've got the James Lindsays and the Barry Weisses, who, to be fair, at least they're not really claiming that they're conservatives, but they're quick to kind of undermine. And they have influence, with certain folks on the left, or the Wall Street Journal editorial page, even, I think, might be not so great on this. But I think certainly our voters are with us on this question. And again, we just, at some point we need to kind of make some hard choices about what sort of alliances we're going to have. But certainly the people who are making things difficult now don't get a seat at the table.
Yeah, I'd like to make it clear that John Schaefer, the legendary guitarist of Ice, Earth, and Demons and Wizards, has been pardoned. And so that is, Mr. Trump has done a great service for fans of heavy metal. Long may he record new albums. That's exactly right. You look at how the left treated BLM writers, right? Did some of them do prison time? Sure, a few, very few of them, but some of them did. But even if they hit cops and they, destroyed buildings and stuff, they spent 4 months, maybe 6 months in jail. Many of these guys were sitting in jail for years. It's over. It's done. There is no reason for this to continue. They've done their time. Penalty, it's there. There was some kind of penalty for what they did, and it's okay to just move on and recognize that ultimately the vast swath of this was a political prosecution. People who did something wrong did pay some level penalty for it, but ultimately you can't let this stuff stand. You can't let people suffer like this under a political, just the taint of everything involved with these trials. It sends a message that you are incredibly weak and that the left can abuse the law and the DOJ at any moment. You absolutely cannot let that continue.
Absolutely. Now you've got the next step, which is I think an even harder step, but just as important, is in a careful way. I want to say this, right? Like, I'm not saying just broad brush, but some of the prosecutors in these and other cases and judges who completely abuse their authorities, they need to face legal consequences, right? And you've got guys like Kurt Schlichter, and Kurt, he can kind of be a fun bomb thrower on X, but whenever he gets into talking about legal things, I mean, he's a pretty high-end lawyer, and he's actually a lot more careful. And he actually had a little Twitter rant today where he was like, people who are not lawyers, and trust me, I appear before liberal judges all the time and deal with liberal, they have no idea just how many systemic safeguards were just completely obliterated in these trials, right? And so when you have guys like Kurt, who again, I think in legal stuff is not actually a bomb thrower, saying this was just way above and beyond the pale of anything that could be justified, we have to take that seriously. And there have to be consequences for people, not because they're our political enemies. I mean, I'm totally against just because somebody agrees with me politically that they have to suffer some punishment, but because they broke the law in really serious ways and because they damaged the system, and there needs to be accountability for that.
For my enemies, the law. So one of the orders obviously was destroying DEI inside of the federal government. We've talked a little bit about that. One of the things we've seen in the attempt to, quote unquote, put the woke away is rearranging positions and relabeling them. And I think some people pointed to the ATF specifically. Once this order got, was signed, or when, they knew it was coming down the pipeline, they started rearranging the deck chairs to, these aren't our DEI officers. They're senior management positions of, I don't know, and so what is your concern? Because we know that we need to get strong Senate confirmations, good leadership, but the vast majority of the bureaucracy is still ensconced. They're still anti-Trump. They're still anti-conservative. Can we get these people dug out without just burning some of these departments down? What does that look like?
Well, we do need to set some examples. And that's why I said right at the outset that I think it's so important that we not just look now, but like 2 weeks from now. I mean, are these guys actually out of the building, or have we just shifted them somewhere else? Now, again, I mean, I think the orders are really clear, and certainly the rhetoric is really clear that these guys are gone. But what I want to start seeing is like, yeah, like they actually fired me and I'm really pissed off about it. And I think that I mean, there may be a legal process that I'm not an expert in federal employment law, so I'm not going to try to pretend to be one. I'm sure that they've thought quite a bit about doing this in a way that's going to stand legal scrutiny, but we should expect those sorts of pushbacks. But it is so vital for us to be able to get control of the government and to exercise the appropriate democratic authority, small d, that the voters have given us. We have to be able to control the bureaucracy and make it do the things that the voters have entrusted us to carry out as policies. And I think the way that we do that is you send a huge message to that mushy middle that if you want to play with fire like these guys were doing, you're going to get burned. And I think that's why, you see this, there's this 10-day thing where, basically you can turn in people who are trying to hide DEI employees under new titles, and there's no consequence. But after that, there is a consequence. I think that's what you need, because those people are not, it's wrong. This is one thing I'm actually very passionate about. We need to stop, in terms of language, using words like, or even allowing words like Trump proofing or anti-Trump. It's anti-democracy. We have been handed people who are doing that. The reason why it's totally okay to be really, really hardcore and going after them is they are subverting the entire democratic system when they do that. We had an election. The people who have been elected are making governance choices. Your job as a bureaucrat is to respect and implement those choices. And if you're trying to subvert them, you're not against Trump, you're against our entire system. And if you're going to be against our entire system, there've got to be real consequences for that.
Now, one of the things I've seen that does worry me a little bit, and again, so many promises are kept at this point. This is not this is kind of almost feels like nitpicking to some level, but I am concerned on a few fronts, and I think now's the time to voice them. I'm not trying to be negative on Trump; he's doing an amazing job, but one or two things that I don't like the look of that I'm hoping that maybe we can hash out a little bit. One of them is I was promised that the Department of Education was toast. And this means a lot to me because I was a public school teacher and I went through public school. I am a victim of the Department of Education in every way that one can imagine.
Yeah.
This is a terrible organization. And, Chris Rufo was talking about, I believe, the department, the deputy that was going into the Department of Education, and people were concerned about her, and actually she's okay. And that's great. I trust Chris Rufo on this stuff, and, he probably knows what he's talking about. But I was promised a demolition of this department, and you don't usually try to install the most capable manager of a building you're planning to blow up. So What do you think's going on here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, the logistics involved with shutting down the department or what needs to happen under what legal authorities, again, I don't want to kind of get out too much over my skis, but I certainly hope that's something that we keep. Everybody since Reagan has been promising to do that. Again, it's always been fake. And again, I think DOE has been one of the biggest failures in terms of messaging on the conservative end, and that people don't even understand. This was a creation of Jimmy Carter. Okay. I mean, this isn't like we had this for 200 years, right? Like in the beginning of my schooling, there was no Department of Education, and somehow,
which is why you can't read. Nobody learned anything, right?
Exactly.
There was no education.
Yeah. Right. So, I think, we haven't gotten that message, and we haven't, come up with, like, to me, like, just the clear winning message is we're going to take the vast majority of that funding, because, I'm sure there's a little bit of that funding that should still go to, something that the federal government's checking, but it's done as some subset of another department. Right. But the vast majority of that money, we should just be handing it back to districts to hire teachers, right?
Yes.
Like that to me is, or, to give pay raises, whatever you want to do, right? Like that, but I think just hiring teachers is probably a winning thing with voters. I think if you put it that way, it's much harder to say, oh, well, this is just the Republicans hating education. I think this would be a really winning message. But even in this administration, I don't know that we fully articulated what we do, do we just shut down the Department of Education? That's it. I think that's harder. I think you need to say, we're going to shut down the Department of Education. We're going to take some of this money we saved and use it to improve your actual local school in a way the Department of Education wasn't doing. And I think that sort of tangible improvement in a local school will resonate with voters.
Yeah, if they need a messaging guy on this, let me know. Like this is not the Department of Education. This is the Department of Propaganda. That is its function inside. It is mandatory propaganda for the left across your entire nation. Like it provably reduces the quality of education while spreading nothing but progressive lies to your children. Like, I feel like there is an easy pitch here. Like the purpose of the system is what it does, not what the label says. In the same way that my border security was not securing the border, and my Department of Defense was not defending my nation, my Department of Education had no interest in actually educating my children. Like, I think we can win this, and we need to win this. So, like I said, just as somebody who was stuck in the system for so long, this one's personal to me. I really hope that they knock this one out.
Yeah, so do I.
The other one that I'm a little concerned about, and we saw this, kind of blow up over Christmas. Elon and Vivek, who mysteriously is out of a lot of this. Best wishes, Ohio. I hope you do well over there with Vivek. But we had the showdown over kind of the H-1B scenario, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, we knew this was coming. This is kind of part of coalitional politics. Silicon Valley always wanted this labor. And so it shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody, even if they pulled it on Christmas. But, they should have recognized this. But, I feel like in some ways that was a gift because it made it a very front and center issue going into the Trump administration. Guys like Vivek seemed to kind of maybe take a hit out of it. But, so there was a scenario where became hard to just kind of sneak this in. However, between that and kind of the Great Panda Express battle on Twitter over Americans should not worry about those tech jobs, there's probably orange chicken to be fried somewhere. Yesterday, the Manhattan Institute was releasing papers about how we should be stapling green cards to every H-1B visa kid. Everyone who has a kid while they're on H-1B visa. It seems like there's still this mentality in many parts of the Republican Party, especially in the establishment, is that actually the H-1B visa is an immigration program. It's not a temporary worker program. This is how we're going to bring people in the United States now. And that is just not what people voted for. That is just absolutely not. So it's great, of course, to get rid of all the illegal immigration. That's like winning 80% of the battle. And that's fantastic. I am more than happy to win 80% of the battle. But I don't want to pretend that last 20% is not. It seems like it's getting leveraged, even after disasters and bad messaging, it's still getting pushed by conservative establishment. And that doesn't seem like people who've learned their lesson.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, this is also going to be it's going to be coalition politics. It's going to be a fight. There are going to be people with different views. Elon, thank you for having my account be one of the 950 that you follow.
Yeah.
I'm not bashing Elon. I think Elon's great. I don't necessarily see totally eye to eye with him, obviously, on this issue, but I do think that he wound up at the end in a place that at least we can kind of live with in a negotiation, which is like, okay, fine, but we just want to bring in what he really cares about is bringing in the best and brightest engineers. And you can argue about numbers or whatever else, but I feel like, whether or not, look, I'm a net zero immigration person. I'm out saying that as my preference. So that's my view. But within the realities of coalition politics, I think the other key thing you said is 80% of it is the illegals, right? So let's get, if tech wants its top engineers, let's get their help, or at least not them obstructing as they've done in the past, on let's get rid of these illegals, right? And really crack down. And then let's take what's left. And if tech is helpful there, I think as a compromise, again, I want to this is not my position. I can live with a more limited and not just targeted at India, which it functionally basically is right now, H-1B type program that really brings us a smaller number of truly elite engineers that, might be kind of a net benefit to society. Again, that's the type of compromise and coalition politics that I can live with. But you're right in that it's still going to be a fight. And I think, from my perspective, the fact that we had this argument up front was great. People saw where the electric wires were. I think the tech bros were kind of taken a little bit aback, but I think message delivered by our voters. And that's great that this is a really core issue with us. We've been lied to too many times. And that if they want any help on some of the parts of the immigration issue that are important to them, that they're going to have to help us on the much bigger parts of the immigration issue.
Now, I'm not a policy expert. I'm not deep in the weeds, and I'm not the biggest wonk, but maybe this is crazy. Let me know if I'm wrong. I mean, if you just put 100% tax on a H-1B position, right? Like if this engineer is so valuable, then pay him the going rate and pay the government the going rate again. He's so valuable. You can't operate a company without him. Pay 100% tax and invest that money in training Americans to do that job.
Right.
You're benefiting Americans and you're giving tech access to what they say they want. If they're not after cheap labor, if they really need these super just impressive engineers, they're all just hiding somewhere in India and we got to go get them. Well, then let's use that to then cultivate that strength inside our own country. I mean, I know that they'd balk at that, but if they did, then that would make me feel like they're not really telling the truth about what that is for.
Sure, absolutely. And my good friend Mark Krikorian, who runs the Center for Immigration Studies, did a piece where he sort of had 3 fundamental reforms. And again, these are not new. Folks like me, and I'm stealing them from people like Mark, have suggested these for a long time. But one of the simplest ones is a little bit along the lines of what you said, which is, okay, just auction them off, right? If they're so valuable, you auction them off. So rather than having what we have right now, which is this random lottery, and all of a sudden somebody is being paid $85,000 a year to come from India to manage your Panda Express or whatever he's doing, or, some low end coding work, you simply say, okay, you want these really top engineers, then pay them like top engineers. And that's, we have a fixed number and it's a lower number. And, whoever pays most gets the most engineers. So I think that's a version of what you're having. I think maybe your version is maybe slightly even more in reinforcing some of the things that we would like to reinforce as a coalition. But I think that's ultimately just going to be, at the end of the day, I mean, this is where I do put on my politically realist hat. It's just, this is going to be a negotiation. And it's like, okay, this is what we want. What we want as a lot of base voters. So what is big tech going to bring to the party to help us that's going to, make us cooperate with them to some degree? But again, I mean, I want to be really realistic that a lot of these guys, whether or not the base likes it, I mean, they're not going away. They're going to be powerful. They're really rich. They're really influential for a reason. And I think it's kind of a fantasy world to just, pretend that none of them will ever have Trump's ear. So the question is, this is the art of the deal. What's the best deal that we can get on behalf of the American people that these guys can also live with, and that we can go forward with as a winning coalition?
Yeah, I think that we're living in the age of money power. We're living in the age of the oligarch, whether you like that or not. And so the question isn't, are you going to get oligarchy? Which oligarchy are you going to get? Are you going to get oligarchs that are at least you have a seat at the table with them, or are you going to get guys that couldn't care less and tell you to go pound sand and put you in jail, right? Like,
I like Elon. Elon has done a lot of great things,
right?
Having a huge role in getting Trump elected, and so he gets a voice, right? Like, and I'm totally cool with that. And, other people also get a voice, and we'll come out. As you said, I think it is right to probably say we're in the age of the oligarch, for better or for worse. And we need to adjust to that and just go forward on that basis.
Now, that brings me to my last question, which I think is important because we've already acknowledged the left. It looks bad, right? Like they're knocked down, they're bleeding, they don't look like they can get up for the 10 count. However, these are people who are rabid, and they will, once they find their feet, they will strike. And so the thing that I think is the most likely, because a lot of people are speculating, which way do they go? How does the left reform? What are their focus? What does the political formula look like for these guys? And my instinct is that if the the standard of living for the average person, kind of the quality of life for the average person doesn't improve under Trump. And I think it will, because I think, deportations and other things will have big effects. However, it sounds like we're going to be printing a lot of money. Yeah, it sounds like we're still going to try to make Wall Street pretty happy, which means inflation's probably going to continue. Like those are just some of the realities. Probably not as bad, because we're going to dial back some of the more egregious stuff. Hopefully the foreign wars and some of this stuff, but it's still going to exist. And I think the line, you've already heard the left test this, is that the right is the party of the oligarchs. Now, of course, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg 10 minutes ago were backing every Democrat in sight, literally buying elections for them. So, that's obviously disingenuous, but I feel like if they don't recognize, and this is why along with the fact that it's just morally correct and good for the people of the United States, one of the reasons I'm pushing on the H-1B stuff and some of these other things so hard is that people need to appreciably feel the increase in their standard of living, so that kind of class warfare argument doesn't gain traction. If you don't make that change, if you allow good middle class American jobs to go to foreigners, inflation continues to move in the direction it's going, then people aren't going to feel like there is a big change. And then the argument about, oh well, the left is saying that he's listening to all these oligarchs and they're getting their way, that's going to be an issue. So if obviously, like you said, guys like Elon, huge contributors to the win, they deserve a place at the table. They're obviously going to have a high degree of influence. But if you don't want that to become a liability, I feel like the way to do that is to make sure that the average person is like, well, yeah, Elon's got the ear of the president, but my life has done nothing but improve because of that. So that's kind of fine, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, then that's going to be the proof in the pudding. I mean, you see the Democrats who hate everything we're doing. They're desperately trying to just make it about that. They're trying to say, well, what's Trump doing about the price of groceries, right? Because they want to just pretend it's all about that and not about the fact that they've been committing cultural arson for decades, and now Trump is popular because he's pushing back against that. But yeah, we absolutely do need to make people's lives better. And I think one of the opportunities we had, I just had a tweet about this earlier that was got a little bit of attention, where I was sort of saying, hey, these folks we're deporting, we're opening up a lot of housing. I mean, I think there's no question that part of the housing crunch we've had is we have this massive increase in the illegal population. And I think here's the sort of important subtlety here, right? That is not evenly distributed. So for the most part, these guys were not having homes in Palo Alto or Malibu or wherever. They were taking homes of working and middle class voters, and maybe sometimes they were 8 to a home, which is another thing entirely. But the sort of real estate that is going to be opened up if we really do anything resembling mass deportations is going to be the sort that is going to benefit the bottom line of people who are maybe our voters. And so I think that is a real opportunity. It's one of these things where there'll be a certain amount, if we do it right, of lying with statistics, not on our side, but just because the statistics themselves will be a little deceptive, where you might see, oh, well, inflation is still going or this. But if you actually look at the world of our core voters, the mass deportations and other things we're doing will be a disproportionate amount of gains to them, right? Whereas before, the Democrats ran an economy that maybe it was doing fine on paper, but really all the gains were to oligarchs. Maybe we're going to have an economy that on a net basis might not do any better, but the gains are going to be for our working and middle class voters, and the cultural gains will be for our working and middle class voters. And we'll be able to come to them and say, hey, your life is better. Oh, by the way, your life is also better because you're not being racially discriminated against again, and you don't have to go to these DEI commissars. And I think just the cultural weight of that on you, I mean, it's so oppressive, just lifting that sort of stuff. I think we can deliver a lot of huge and tangible wins, even if money printer go burr, and we're going to have to deal with, some of those things that will, make the economy less than perfect. But I think it can definitely be good enough that that combined with some of these other wins, our voters can be really happy if we do it well.
Yeah, I agree. All of the economic data shows that the economic growth, the new job creation has gone to immigrants and
Right.
and recent arrivals. It has not gone to the core population of the United States, citizens of the United States. And so the fact that you are going to see those opportunities reopen for
Right.
Americans, that economic growth will go to Americans, and that you have, like you said, the housing
Right.
crisis will be eased most effectively for working and middle class Americans, means even if the inflation continues at a pace that might not be ideal, the practical, do I have a job opportunity? Can I afford a home?
Yeah.
These things are going to be far more open to the average American. And so I
Right.
think ultimately you're right that that's going to look a lot better.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to pivot over to the questions of the people. But before we do, Jeremy, where should people look for you, your work, your book, all of that stuff?
Sure. So, Real Jeremy Carl is my X/Twitter feed. You can join Elon Musk and the cool crowd if you follow me. You can follow my Substack, which is called The Course of Empire, jeremycarl.substack.com, and my book, which is gotten a little bit of attention as of late, partially because of some of these orders maybe looking suspiciously like a few folks had cracked my book. The Unprotected Class is available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and hopefully a fine local bookstore near you if that's where your proclivities lie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very encouraging that these guys were familiar with the issues because many of them had interacted with your book, and that's absolutely fantastic. All right, so let's bring Anon Reviewer on here real quick. He said, I'm glad that Trump freed Ross Ulbricht, but he also needs to pardon Douglas Mackey and or the political meme guy. How do we contact Tucker to tell Trump? Dave Smith says that the best way to get something, that's the best way to get something to Trump. Actually, as I've seen, Doug Mackey specifically said he did not want a pardon because he's hoping that a good precedent will be set in his case. Because he absolutely does. He should be pardoned. His charges are ridiculous, a complete violation of the First Amendment. But it sounds like strategically he has asked not to receive a pardon.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I actually know some of the folks who are leading Doug's legal team, and he is not. He does not want to be pardoned for just that reason, because I think we have some degree of confidence that we're going to win this case. That we certainly feel like we have the facts and law on our side, and that it will set a good free speech precedent. If we somehow lose the case, I am confident that Trump is going to do the right thing, and that Douglas Mackey is not going to see the inside of a jail cell, because it's one of the more ridiculous cases of lawfare that was out there.
Yeah, I met him and his wife, and it's just absolutely insane that they're in the situation they're in. So I'm very glad that he feels confident. I think it is very brave of him to say that the precedent is important, and even though I could probably get a pardon, I'm going to see this. And like you said, it is good to know that that is backstopped by the fact that if for some reason there is a horrible miscarriage of justice, probably can get make sure that that is not something that he ends up enduring. Let's see here. Florida Henry says, so far, very happy, but Trump only won by 1.5% of the vote to an insane Democratic Party. When they come back, what's to stop them from going full Maoist?
Yeah, well, this is interesting. It actually feeds a little bit into my kind of follow-up book that I'm working on right now, which is The Insanity of the White Left. And I think one of the interesting things, first of all, I'd say two things. One is that even though we just got a relatively modest popular vote win, the Electoral College win, which is ultimately what really matters, was a little more decisive. And I think the Electoral College is clearly going our way, not just in general, but in very specific. We will probably add, without doing anything, like just at the next census, so just after one more presidential election, we'll add like 12 or 13 more electoral votes to the solid red tally, just because of population movements. If we manage to get illegal immigrants discounted from census apportionment, you can add another 5 to 7 seats on top of that, so it could be very large. But essentially, one of the things I'm going to argue in my book is that, and I'm kind of arguing this in a bunch of talks I'm going to be giving in a number of universities over the next month, is if we really want to be that permanent majority party, and I say permanent in quotes because there are no permanent majorities, but the sort of natural majority party, let's say, in the way that the Dems were from 1932 to 1968, what needs to happen is we need to get more white voters, because actually Trump, despite the fact that white voters have been hugely discriminated against by the Democrats, performed slightly worse than Romney among them. And he saw these enormous gains among minority voters for him, particularly Latinos, where he took 46% to 51 or 52 for Harris. That's great. I mean, that's lovely. I want as big and multi-ethnic a coalition as we can get. I'm not in any way trying to discourage that. But when you look at where the real opportunity to grow share are, especially given how anti-white the Democratic Party is, as I kind of documented in the Unprotected Class, the real target of opportunity is going to be among those white voters. And I think maybe, I don't want to speculate 4 years in advance, but a guy like J.D. Vance might be able to reach some of those upscale white voters in a way that Trump had a harder time doing. So I think that's an area that we're going to have to focus on, because you're right. I mean, if the questioner is right, like if the Dems take over, we're going to get insanity. But I don't really think they held back much that they could have done. I mean, I think we saw it. So, I'm not sure like it's going to be 50 times worse. It'll suck again for 4 years. But I do think that if we do things right, they'll be a little bit chastened, because now the people who were oppressing us realize that we're not afraid to hold the whip hand and use the whip when we need to. And I think that will incentivize a little bit more responsible behavior on their part. At least I hope it does.
Let's make that pendulum actually swing. Let's make it swing hard. And ultimately, I think that a guy like J.D. Vance is promising, because he has kind of the Appalachian roots, but the Yale pedigree, and that allows him to probably make that case, like you said, to a lot of people that might have had trouble with Trump to some degree or another. Though obviously he still did amazing in the last election here. Tiny Stupid Demon says, not tired of winning. Also, thumbnail goes hard. Well, again, we had to take a breather. We sat down on the porch. We had some sweet tea, but we're prepared. We're back in it. We're prepared to win a little more. Yo says, congrats on the win. I hope we get some downstream positive effects here in New Zealand before we get eaten by cannibals. Yeah, I mean, the hope really is that this cascades. And, Steve Turley has been talking about this as a global movement, and I talked to Steve about that, and I think there is some evidence to that. Obviously, you look at a place like the UK, and they're having a big problem, but also just I know a lot of my friends in the UK, even though they have a terrible government, they look at what's happening with Trump and they're like, we want that, and we want it now. Who can give us that, right? And when you see those wins, when you see that cascade, it encourages everybody else. So, we're American nationalists. We're, mainly considering the well-being of the United States. But I certainly hope that my friends in other countries can benefit from these wins as they see the possibility that Trump unlocks.
Yeah, absolutely. It's okay to win. It's good to win. And when you do win, you show other people that winning is possible. They're like, why are we not getting there? I mean, we had this to a small effect when we were looking at folks like Bukele and El Salvador in the last few years, right? Where we're like, well, we've got some problems, but we weren't nearly as in disastrous shape as El Salvador. And he seems to have just turned that around. So we want that, right? And of course, we have an infinitely higher profile than El Salvador. So if we show that we can win, I think it stiffens the spines of folks throughout the West. And I think that's just obviously a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it turns out you can just do things and then win, and then people will like you. And you also got Elon, which, obviously some disagreements here, but ultimately Elon is also pushing in, reform in the UK. He's pushing the AfD in Germany. And, he's a force, so there is that opportunity as well. I hope that, helps people out in the long run. Perspicacious Heretic says, anything but conservative overreach. I'd rather be hated and have every aspect of my family and community ruined. Yeah, it really is that simple. Trump got shot. He recognized the existential crisis. America was severely wounded. We recognize the existential crisis. If you are not willing to take the steps to conserve America, just stop calling yourself conservative and let's move on,
Yeah. No, and I'm glad, by the way, just to go back to something you had just said, that you mentioned Elon's support of AfD and talking about Germany and talking about grooming gangs in the UK. And I say that to say, here's a very powerful guy that, whether or not I happen to agree with him in a micro sense on H-1Bs, is not some tech bro who's just totally not cognizant or caring about some of these broader cultural issues affecting the West, right? Or immigration issues. And so I'm kind of like, this is a guy we ought to be able to do business with. Like if we can't do business with the guy who's using the biggest account on Twitter, or it was at least one of the 5 biggest, to say we must vote AFD to save Germany, then I think we're definitely in a purity spiral, right? Like, and right. I'm just not a purity spiraler by nature.
Yeah, this guy's not Mark Zuckerberg. Okay,
no, absolutely.
There's a very different animal. Zuckerberg, is he's a soulless lizard person who censors everything, and then Trump's gonna win. All of a sudden, he's on Joe Rogan. He gets the bro baptism. He's got a fro. He's doing BJJ. Like wherever the wind's blowing, that's where he's going. Elon's a little different. So don't just paint with the same brush there. Yeah. Creeper Weirdo says, to my friends, here, find a mirror, look into it, and repeat after me. It's our democracy now. And then he also says, from Panama to Mars, the future is ours. All our slogans here. And then Life of Brian says, when does rubber meet the road? Read the economic populist issues. DEI is a good start, but how do you see the real Bannon-Rufo fight going down? I hope ultimately it's not a fight. Again, I want to be careful, guys. Like, we need to apply friendly pressure. Okay. This doesn't mean go out and shoot your friends. That's not the situation here. Rufo has done great work on many issues. He is one of the most effective conservative activists of all time. He's just wrong about something, and that's okay. I've been wrong about stuff, okay? And then people let me know I was wrong about stuff, and I learned lessons, and then I move forward, and it's okay. It's okay to have friendly conversations, have your opinions, have them forcefully, but don't go and burn down all of your bridges on one thing. That is just foolish. Have a little bit of wisdom. Apply the pressure properly. Don't be weak. Don't back down, but don't burn things down for the sake of burning them down. You don't have to be the dissidents forever. Yeah. You won. Yeah. It's okay.
This is so important, and I feel like you and I are probably saying this on Twitter regularly, but yes, it's okay to win, and we've won, and we need to stop acting. We don't want to be addicted to being dissidents. We actually would like to be winners, and that's a good thing. And I think with the specifics of kind of the Bannon, I mean, it's not getting as much attention right now. But I think the tariff issue, if we get any sort of traction on this can be hugely, hugely beneficial for things like American manufacturing. And again, that's something where you're not just going to be able to look at some raw GDP number. Maybe it doesn't move raw GDP in some dramatic way, but in terms of working in middle-class Americans, opening up manufacturing jobs, opening up reshoring, a lot of those kind of middle-class jobs can be a huge benefit for people who either are our voters right now or for people who we would like to have as our voters. So I think that's one of the ways this could play out.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Always great talking to Jeremy. If for some reason you have not read the Unprotected Class, you should do that. And very importantly, hand it to, the guy just slightly to your left who you think might be open to this kind of thing, might be ready to hear a little bit more, was worried that the bomb throwers were the only people making this argument. You hand them a book like that, and they can be a little more comfortable discussing a difficult issue and addressing it. Of course, if it's your first time on this channel, make sure you're subscribing. Click the bell notification, all of that stuff, so you know when we're going live. If you'd like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. When you do leave the rating or review, it really helps with the algorithm magic. And if you want to pick up my book, it's finally out on audiobook after a long slog. The Total State, you can go and listen to it, or of course pick it up in a physical copy as well. Thank you everybody for watching, and as always, I will talk to you next time.